financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. It's December 4th, 2017, 27 more days to go to an amazing year. So economy is banging on all cylinders. So it would appear employment numbers are just wonderful. And a great number, one is very entertaining number, is RV sales. And RV sales, as you might expect, are through the moon, Alice. Why is that? How could it be? Well, before we get started, engage in the show, join us. We welcome your participation. Email us kl@kerrylutz.com and the Twitter feed's @KerryLutz. So John Rubino, dollarcollapse.com is with us now. And John, what to make of RV sales? It seems like the best of all possible worlds.
Hey, Kerry. Yeah, it's yet another sign of a top. You know, our RV sales are extremely cyclical because that's the kind of thing you buy when you have extra money, right? And people have extra money to the extent that they ever do. They have it at the top of a cycle after the economy has been growing for a few years and they've been getting raises at work and their stocks are up and they're basically feeling pretty good about the future and pretty smart about their own behavior. So then you go out and buy a big toy to reward yourself. And an RV is the ultimate big toy. I mean, it's a house on wheels, a very expensive house in a lot of cases. So what you see over and over again is RV sales spiking just as the economy peaks for a given cycle. And then the economy turns down. And what do you do when you lose your job or you suddenly don't feel smart anymore because your stocks are down? You start selling your toys, right? And the RV is one of the first things that you sell, maybe right after the big boat, right? And right before the vacation house. So RV sales tank as an economy falls into a recession and the stocks of RV makers fall by 60, 70, 80, 90%. It's a bloodbath in that market. So we are just based on the chart at another peak, which will be followed at some point in the not too distant future by another trough. So RV sales are, in that sense, a pretty good indicator of where we are in the cycle. But it's one indicator among a lot of different indicators now. You know, everywhere you look, in terms of valuation measures, they're all up there at 1929 or 2000 or at least 2006 levels. In other words, we're grossly overvalued no matter how you examine financial assets. And if history is any kind of a guide, then we've got the 2008, 2009 kind of thing coming where something happens to cause the market to crack. Everybody panics. They get out much faster than they got in, but the exit is too small and lots of people lose huge amounts of money. And you know, it looks like it might metastasize into a depression from a recession. You know, the whole thing that we had in 2008, 2009, only probably much bigger because the numbers are much bigger this time. Whether that's a 2018 story or not remains to be seen. But based on the charts, it is. So then the question becomes, is this time different and in what way? And, you know, there are some reasons to think that this might go on a little longer. Most of those reasons having to do with central banks. You know, they're behaving a lot more aggressively than they ever had in the past. And that gives bubbles more air to inflate with.
More fuel.
But it doesn't, it doesn't negate the basic laws of finance and economics, which dictate that when you reach certain levels of valuation, things aren't a good deal anymore. And we'll see where that, we won't know till it happens, and we're looking back on it, exactly where the point of inflection is and everything. But, I think we're getting close based on the charts. So I think it's conceivable that this is a 2018 story. In other words, the bursting of the bubble is a next 12 months story.
Well, John, we did get so-called tax reform, right? I mean, that ought to be good for a couple of quarters of keeping the bubble going.
Actually, that fits into this story really nicely because, I just published something last week on Dollar Collapse about how what's happening here with tax reform is happening in various forms around the world, which is that governments have basically given up on trying to control their spending or their deficits. They gave it lip service, and they tried for years, and they found out nobody really cares. Nobody likes austerity. Nobody really punishes politicians who borrow too much money. And so they're all kind of giving up at the same time and just deciding to spend more money. In the US, originally tax reform was aimed at making the system simpler and fairer and more conducive to efficiency. But it's evolved into a big tax cut now because that's easy and it's fun and you make people happy when you give them a tax cut. So politicians love doing that, and they aren't going to be punished for it because we have been completely desensitized to deficits. If it's $1 billion this year, what does that mean? Oh, that's sort of like what Obama did. Okay, we'll double the national debt again in the next 8 years. No big deal, because it didn't kill us to do it in the previous two presidential administrations. So why not do it again? In Japan, they have the biggest government deficits and the most immense government debt in relation to GDP of any country ever. So they've been under some pressure to rein in their deficit spending for the past few years. And they publish, timetables and target dates and things like that. And
I've never met them.
But just this time around, the Japanese government decided to do away with deficit targets and instead spend a lot of new money on early childhood education, among other things, which kind of implies that they made the same decision that deficits really aren't a problem. Debt is not a problem. So let's buy a lot of votes in the here and now by giving people stuff that make them happy. That does work politically until it doesn't work. Eventually debt destroys you. And, that's got a historical precedent going all the way back to the Roman Empire. And governments do it over and over again. They debase their currency and they borrow too much money, or they spend too much money that they acquire by some other means than borrowing. Mm-hmm. And eventually it comes back to haunt them in the form of a currency crisis where they have to cut the value of their currency really dramatically to handle the borrowing and that or handle the interest on their debt. And that screws up the financial system, causes a big economic crisis. And then the system resets at some, really brutally lower point. We're headed for that globally for the first time ever in human history, where every government is making basically those same mistakes. Basically, the thing that caused the Roman Empire hyperinflation, or the post-French Revolution hyperinflation, or the Weimar Germany hyperinflation. Everybody's doing the same thing, and
sure.
There's really no way that this doesn't cause some kind of a big crisis in the future. But the fact that governments have kind of given up on trying to stave off this huge increase in debt that they've had going for 30 years now kind of implies that we're also at a blow-off stage in that part of the economy. People are just saying, all right, let me buy tech stocks. I don't care. They're going to go up forever. Or let me buy Bitcoin because it'll go up forever. And now governments are saying, well, let me borrow money because I can get away with it forever. And all of these things are peak of the cycle phenomena.
Absolutely. And okay, so something's got to give at some point, John. And the big question, the money question is, when is that day going to be upon us?
Yeah, that is the big question. If you can time the bursting of a bubble, you can make insane amounts of money. And, the movie The Big Short is about that. Some guys who tried to time the housing market bust, and they got it wrong. They were all too early, but they held on and they stuck it out. And in the end, the bubble burst and just made them fortunes. And that's how bursting bubbles work. They go on and they go on and they go on. And if you're too early, you get creamed when you start betting against them. But if you time it reasonably right, in other words, not too early, you don't want to be too late, because when it bursts, it happens quickly. All the carnage can happen in the space of like 6 months. So if you miss the first 3 or 4 months of it, you don't make nearly as much. On the other hand, if you're 4 years too early, you also don't make nearly as much. So what you want to do is, get it within the year before. Start shorting everything in sight the year before the bubble bursts. But of course, what year is that? It's really hard to call it, because in the tech stock bubble in the 1990s, 1998 seemed like the year, but it didn't burst to 2000. The housing bubble. I wrote a book about the housing bubble in 2003, and the housing bubble didn't burst until 2007. Yeah. So if you'd listened to me, you either made a lot of money or lost a lot of money, depending on when you put the strategies in that book into practice. And, I heard from people who lost their shirts because they jumped right on it, and other people who made a fortune because they took their time and sold their house, and then they used the proceeds to short the home builders, and then they made a lot of money. This one really has the feel of 1999 or 2006, 2007, when things are really starting to roll over, or where the blow off top is reaching a point where the rollover should be imminent. However, the financial world is littered with the bones of people who were sure that the bubble was going to pop this year and bet the farm on it, and we're wrong. So you can't know this stuff until after the fact. Only with 2020 hindsight does the bursting of the bubble look obvious.
You know what they say, John? There's nothing worse than being right at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, being way too early is the same thing as being wrong. Mm-hmm. But of course, being a little late is also the same thing as being wrong. So, none of this is easy, and you can't do it perfectly. You can't make exactly the most money that it's possible to make in something like this, but it is possible to make a lot of money by being reasonably right with the timing of a bursting bubble. Mm-hmm. And I think we're approaching a time that definitely feels like the right time for something like this. And there will be absolutely insane fortunes made out there when this one bursts, because there's so many different asset classes you can bet against now. Is it going to be government bonds that go into a tailspin? Mm. Is that where the money's going to be made? Or the FANG stocks? Or maybe Bitcoin. Who knows?
Maybe Bitcoin. You'll be able to
maybe Bitcoin. Yeah. Well, an interesting thing that happened just in the last few days about Bitcoin is the EU and the UK have decided to start regulating Bitcoin, and the US IRS is going after Bitcoin exchanges wanting their records because, trading Bitcoin is a taxable event. Every transaction is a buying and selling of a commodity under our tax laws. So you owe money if you bought and sold Bitcoin, and so the government wants that money and they're going to come after you. And that's going to make Bitcoin in particular and cryptocurrencies in general less interesting as transaction mechanisms.
Yes.
If you got to pay taxes on every transaction, that's less of a good deal for you because you're already paying transaction fees.
Yeah. Well, John, are you going to risk going to jail? Like I said to you before, I might have said it to you before, but I've said it to others. At your age, we're both right around the same age, a few months apart. Are you willing to go to jail for possession of Bitcoin with intent to distribute? Are you going to spend 5 years in jail to do that?
I'm not willing to go to jail for anything other than protecting my family, I think.
Right.
A lot of people will come to that conclusion.
That's my point exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You could, I'm sure there are mechanisms that can track your tax liabilities if you're transacting in Bitcoin so that you do know what number you have to pay at the end of the year and you can pay it.
Right.
However, that's still a pain. It's an extra layer of complexity that is on top of already complex stuff that you got to know and keep up with to trade Bitcoin.
So look,
if you buy it and you put it away, that's one thing. You sell it one time, you pay a capital gains tax on it.
Yes. But John, if they outlaw it, you're not going to risk going to jail to play around with it, right?
No, if they make it illegal, then it becomes a black market commodity.
Right. And are you going to, and with all the tracking that the government has now and everything else, you're not going to take a risk on it. And I'm not either. No.
So, and see, something like that is coming. Governments are now suddenly finding Bitcoin threatening. Because it really is a threat to the fiat currencies of the world.
And we've been talking about it for years. And yet these idiots that are responsible for running the country and keeping things going were clueless about it until, they weren't clueless. They were hoping it would go away. So what's the best way for a central bank to make it go away? Let's bid it up to 30,000 and then crash it. Bid it up to an unsustainable point and then bring it back down to reality. What do you think it'll go down to after the crash? It's going to crash.
This is a story with so many moving parts and so much really interesting technology because, you've got governments that are embracing Bitcoin itself. You've got other governments that are trying to regulate it out of existence or at least make it way less attractive for people to use as currency. And you've got other governments who are creating their own cryptocurrencies, which they will use as legal tender,
like
presumably
Venezuela.
to the, in their hope, to the exclusion of all other cryptocurrencies.
Did
and we have
that?
no idea how this is going to turn out. And you've got big banks looking at blockchain technology that they want to use for their own operations.
For everything.
Not Bitcoin, but blockchain, the underlying technology. And, how all this shakes out, a lot of people seem to think they know. Good for them, because it's too complicated for me. I have no idea how this is going to play out at all.
What I know is I don't know. But when Venezuela starts talking blockchain, well, what do they got to lose, right? What do they got to lose, Venezuela, by proposing a blockchain type currency? It's like they have nothing to lose on this thing. I don't think anyone is going to be any more confident in Venezuela's currency, whether it's in blockchain or paper. The only way they're going to get confidence back in their currency is by making it gold. Otherwise, you're not going to trust anything Venezuela does, right? You're going to trust their currency.
That's one way it could go for really weak countries. Zimbabwe, Venezuela, somebody like that might just adopt a cryptocurrency as their new money, the way that they used to adopt U.S. dollars. See, that should kind of scare the U.S. as much as anything else that has to do with the cryptocurrency boom right now, is that countries that would have gone back to dollars possibly as their legal tender are now choosing Bitcoin or trying to make their own version of Bitcoin or something like that. So this really is a threat to the big fiat currencies. And how they respond is going to determine in large part how the whole cryptocurrency thing evolves. If they embrace it and try to co-opt it, that's one thing. If they try to stamp it out, that's another thing. If they choose some middle ground, then who knows? It's not clear who chooses what and how it all plays out. But we are definitely looking at one of the most fascinating 5 or so years in monetary history.
Yes, we are. And I'm not predicting that the bad guys are going to win. The governments, in other words. I'm definitely not predicting that. But I'm saying that it's not as clear-cut and simple as many of you out there would like to believe. There's a lot of battles left in this thing, and governments just don't give up. They say, we can't collect all the taxes, we won't collect any. No, you know the way things work here, John. It doesn't work that way at all. They just keep doing it till they destroy themselves and everyone else. This is history. So to think that it's going to be, it's too much trouble to collect taxes on Bitcoin, you're really kidding yourself. It's just not going to work that way. It's not. I hate to tell you.
No.
You know it. Look at history.
Don't give up power if they don't have to. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't give up power. And
nobody actually gives up power.
No, not willingly, right? Not
nature to have power and give it up voluntarily.
Not willingly, they don't do it.
Yeah.
And that's because governments are all about power in the end. It's all about, imposing their will upon you, the taxpayer, whatever. This is the way it works. So let's not kid ourselves here. Anyway, find John's work over at dollarcollapse.com. Sign up for his newsletter. And same with us, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Got a webinar coming up on Wednesday with John Rosinski, the head of Osisko Mining, and myself talking about Bitcoin and gold and all the things that you want to hear about. And there'll be a special surprise there for you. Hey, you'll also get the paper that John and I wrote on cryptocurrencies. So it's worth checking it out. Just email me, kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @kerrylutz, and the Facebook page is Financial Survival Network. So take a look at it, John. We got a lot to talk about for next week. I have a feeling there's just some crazy things happening here that are building up. So let's see. Anyway, same time, same place next week, and we'll talk to you then.
Okay, Kerry. Talk to you then.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival